Hi everyone, it's Math with A, U, B. Just get along. Little drops of water make the mighty ocean. Discrete mathematics. How to deal implication question? Implication, or if then, they are same thing. Implication or if then. Single conditional, one-sided conditional. How to find their inverse? How to find the inverse of the implication? What do you mean by the converse of the implication? What do you mean by contrapositive of the implication? Contrapositive of the implication. Inverse can be related to anything. Negation. It is simply negation. But in case of if and then, it has some same meaning though, but it is in the if and then condition. Converse, what do you mean by converse? What do you mean by contrapositive? Let me brief to you these simple ones. We have given first statement: if you start using drugs, then you are moron. Start using drugs. Suppose RP is you start using drugs, and Q, the second proposition is you are a moron. You are a moron. How to write this one in implication? Simply, that's a if, that's then. If you start using drugs, then you are a moron. Means P implies Q. P implies Q. P implies Q. P is sufficient for you. P is sufficient for you. This is one way of implication. Then, what do you mean by inverse? How to write inverse of this one? Inverse, we have to introduce a negative of both of these. It will become, are these statements to compound sentence? This conditional sentences can be converted to if, according to inverse, if you do not start using drugs, then you are not a moron. That is the inverse of this proposition. This if and then, this implications, inverse is given by our implication reads as if you start using drugs, then you are a moron. How inverse can be read? If you do not start using drugs, then you are not a moron. How to write in symbols? Negation of P implies negation of Q. Negation of P implies negation of Q. Negation of P implies negation of Q. Next, how to find converse of this implication? Converse. What do you mean by converse? We can read their converse as if you are not a moron. Change the position of both the statements. Dependent will become conditional and independent will become conditional. This one, if you are not a moron, then you start using drugs. If you are a moron, then you start using drugs. That is the converse of this statement. If you start using drugs, then you are a moron. Its converse is if you are a moron, then you start using drugs. What about finally contrapositive? Contrapositive is combination of both of these. Inverse as well as converse. Blend both of these. Look how, let me make some space for myself, then I am writing. Contrapositive of this statement. Contrapositive. Contrapositive can be written as P implies Q. P implies Q. Contrapositive. Contrapositive is negative Q implies negative P. 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 This is contrapositive. This is contrapositive of P implies Q. P implies Q. Look at this. It is inverse as well as converse. It is inverse as well as converse. What about inverse? Inverse will become negation P, negation P. It's our inverse. Contrapositive for converse, we change both the position of this one. If become then become if. Q implies negation, Q implies negation P. Now it is our contrapositive. It is our contrapositive. It is our contrapositive is simply converse of the inverse. Our contrapositive is converse of the inverse. Converse of the inverse. Converse of the inverse. How to read that? How to read that? If you are not a moron, if you are not a moron, then you do not start using ducts. Then you do not start using drugs. Then you do not start using drugs. That is the contrapositive of this implication. If you start using drugs and this one. Let me write simply. This is our simple implication. This is our inverse. This is our inverse. What about converse? Q implies P. This is our converse. Blend of inverse and converse is known as implication. This is our contrapositive. Contrapositive. Contrapositive is negative Q implies negative P. Negative Q implies negative P. Negative Q implies negative Q. How to read in word contrapositive? If you are not a moron, then you do not start using that. Moving towards next question, we have